This week on the show, we are delighted to be joined by none other than Bill Cramer, CEO of Wonderful Machine. Now, this is a very long episode, so we've cut the waffle and all the preamble, and we're going to jump straight into it. We cover costing your work, licensing, and negotiation, so I think there's something for everyone in this one. Sit back and enjoy. Today on the show, we are incredibly honoured and excited to be joined by Mr. Bill Cramer, coming to us all the way from West Philadelphia. Bill was a commercial photographer for 20 years before deciding to start a little business called Wonderful Machine, which if you haven't heard about it, you will want to hear about it. If you're a photographer, it's an amazing resource. They do some amazing work. I've been a big fan of them for a long time, and it's definitely something that should be on your radar. Now, he's been working on that for the last 15 years. So this is a man with a lot of experience in the industry. I think this episode is going to be a real kind of informative one. So make sure you're taking notes. Bill, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, great to be here, Greg. Tom, thank you so much for having me.
Now, obviously, you're on a different time zone, aren't you? So, are you just waking up?
Yeah, it's bright and early. Well, I'm usually up at about 5 a.m. with my dog Tilly.
Okay.
So I'm wide awake and fed and showered. So I think I'm ready to go here.
Well, me and Tom are normally awake at 5 a.m., but mainly because of screaming babies. So yeah, we feel you on that one. So tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit of background to start with, Bill. I mean, you've obviously been, when you started photography, it was a different time, a very different industry in some ways. Tell us a little bit about how you got into photography and kind of growing up with it.
Yeah, so I grew up partly in California, in Palo Alto, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had a photography teacher in grade school. We had a little dark room, and Mrs. Alexo had all these old cameras that she loaned out to the students, and she had a bulk film loader with Tri-X. I don't know if you guys remember Tri-X. Mm-hmm. But she had these 100-foot spools of Tri-X, and she would sort of roll out, 24 exposures for each of us, and we'd run off and shoot pictures. So it was just a magical experience, very different from digital, with the processing the film and making the prints and being in the darkroom. So it was a really exciting time for a little kid to just sort of explore photography that way. And then I just sort of started paying attention to what other photographers, to what real photographers were doing, looking at magazines and books and, looking at people like Gene Smith or Irving Penn or Richard Avedon, and just sort of expanding my consciousness of what was going on in the world.
And were there any kind of early influences on your photography in terms of, because those are some big names right off the bat?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I just was enthralled with any kind of pictures of people. I was aware of, everybody was aware of Ansel Adams taking pictures of mountains, but I was just really interested in anything to do with fashion or portraiture or photojournalism. So just absorbing every photo book I could get my hands on, and discovering all sorts of photographers doing all sorts of things. I remember discovering Gary Winogrand and just his ability to find these crazy moments out on the street, or Diane Arbus and all the just the idea of like making a portrait and having a portrait be so evocative and so something more than just sort of somebody sitting in front of the camera, and then learning about the photojournalists, including Ouija, who was so unique. I mean, it's just amazing to me that there can be so many unique takes on photography, and I think Ouija is another example, not unlike Diane Arbus, where we all have the same cameras and we all have the same film, and we all have the same people and streets to photograph in. And it's amazing to me. I can remember, discovering that individual photographers could have such an individual, personal take on the world.
Mm.
I love that you name drop Ouija. My all time favorite photographer is Ouija. Huge fan. Huge fan. Murder is My Business is honestly one of my all time great books.
Yeah, yeah.
Big
So
fan.
I'm guessing you didn't start your career by following the footsteps of Ouija and chasing ambulances.
Um, so I picked up the photography in California, but then when I moved back to Pennsylvania for high school and college, and I somewhat randomly picked Penn State University to go to college, and they happened to have a really excellent student newspaper. And
Hmm.
so I basically sort of rekindled my interest in photography, and ended up working on this daily newspaper. It basically was my education. I sort of didn't go to any of my classes. I just worked for the student newspaper, shooting sports and what little news there is in central Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And so I was able to graduate college with essentially a legitimate newspaper portfolio,
Hmm.
and it allowed me to get assignments right away. So I was able to start working for the Associated Press right away, and so I worked in the as a stringer for the AP in Philadelphia for about 4 years, and then I started working for the New York Times, and then I just sort of expanded to local magazines and then national magazines, and then just kept pursuing all kinds of different clients. So I started doing corporate assignments and assignments for hospitals and universities, and then eventually did some advertising photography. And
Hmm.
I just enjoyed sort of continuing to expand that circle of trying out working for different types of clients.
Sure. Just for the sake of the guests who aren't based in the US, a stringer is
Oh, is that a new term for you guys?
for me personally. I
So
think I know what it is. You drive up and down the highways in your cars, listening to the scanners and hoping for a
okay,
story.
so there are the guys who have a scanner. Back then, I don't know if scanners still exist,
Hmm.
but there were guys who would chase ambulances. It's true.
Right.
I was so it's a stringer means a freelance newspaper photographer or wire service photographer, basically a um, freelance news photographer.
Right.
And I think the expression came from back when reporters used to get paid by the amount of inches of copy that appeared in the newspaper, and
Hmm.
so the editor would run a string along the copy, and if it was 5 inches, you'd get paid $5 or whatever it was. So they were called stringer. I mean, this is my recollection. I didn't look this up for the program here,
No,
but
that's
but stringer is a freelancer who's working for newspapers and wire services.
right. Okay. Cool.
So
Excellent.
that's an interesting start. So you kind of came from this documentary background, but then you started doing more commercial work. Is that right? How did you make
Um,
that transition?
So, I mean, my philosophy was I wanted to make money.
Hmm.
I wanted to be able to support myself. I mean, cameras were expensive. When I graduated from college, I don't know if you guys did much news photography, but when you were in news photography, a photographer in the late 80s, uh, everybody would shoot news and sports and weather features and everything. And the one lens that you had to have was a 300-2.8. And so when I was, I guess, 24 years old, I spent about $2,300 on a 300-2.8, and my dad thought I was crazy because I was working for the Associated Press for $50 an assignment, and he couldn't understand how I was going to pay for a $2,400 lens,
Hmm.
$50 at a time. But so it was really clear, really fast to me that if I was going to be able to move out of my parents' house and buy expensive photo equipment, that I was going to need to make money.
Hmm.
So I just made it my business to explore all kinds of photography, and I knew that there was newspaper photography, which was low paying, and then there was magazine photography, which was a little bit better paying, and then there was corporate and advertising, which was even better. So I was just
Hmm.
interested in all of it, and I did a lot of assisting along the way. So I was also exposed to other photographers. The first guy I assisted, a guy named Jim Graham in Philadelphia. I remember my first week. It was my job to help him set up a food shoot. He used to work for the National Enquirer,
Hmm.
which is a tabloid newspaper in the United States, and they had it was mostly sort of stories about alien abductions and stuff like that. But in every issue, in every week, they would have a Kraft macaroni and cheese ad on one page, and so they needed legitimate, like a food photo on the other page. And so they hired Jim, and once a week he would do this, and they would pay him $1,000. And this is back in 1986, when $1,000 was a lot of money. And so so I would set up. He would have a food stylist and a prop stylist come in, and I would set up the table and the light and the camera. And Jim would walk in, snap a Polaroid, look at it, snap a few frames, and go back to his office. And I would then, the stylist and I would put everything away, and he would collect $1,000. I was making $4 an hour at the time. And I thought that's amazing that a photographer could charge $1,000 for a picture. And so, I just wanted to be part of that.
Fair enough.
And
can't blame you.
You assisted for a bit, and then you transitioned into the commercial world. At what point in your career did you start to think about creating Wonderful Machine, and why did that come about?
Yeah, so I did lots and lots of assignments where I would photograph people for magazines or corporations. I can remember photographing a lot of doctors who were part of a medical practice, and I can remember photographing attorneys who were part of law firms. And I thought, why can't photographers come together in a cooperative like that? And so I experimented and failed once. Before we all switched to digital, I got a couple of photographers together, and we shared a space, and we shared an office manager, and we tried to do a cooperative, but it was too cumbersome with trying to share the cost of film and Polaroid and processing and messengers and shipping. It was just really onerous to keep track of all that. So that collapsed. But then after we all switched to digital a couple of years later, I experimented with it again with a couple photographers, and digital allowed us to basically share much more easily than film allowed for. And so with digital, you could basically share to a certain extent equipment, and of course we could share our studio, and to a certain extent staff. We had interns, so we would sort of share assistants, and it worked out for a while. It worked out really well. There was a point where we had one corporate client where we had 6 different photographers working for this one corporate client. We were billing them about $100,000 a year. And so that I felt like I had sort of achieved what I set out to achieve, by bringing photographers together. But then that sort of pivoted, and we ended up expanding to more of like a global marketing company for photographers instead of just a local cooperative.
Sure. So do you want to give us a kind of the listeners like a kind of an overview of what Wonderful Machine kind of is today?
Yeah, so we started out as a cooperative with 3 photographers. Now we are more of a production company with 600 photographers around the world. We've got photographers in 40 countries. The main thing we do is provide a directory of photographers for clients, and so photographers pay us a monthly fee, and in exchange we have this searchable database of photographers, and we promote that website to 25,000 publications, agencies, and brands. In addition to that directory, we also provide photographers with all sorts of what we call consulting services, which means that we've got graphic designers in-house who can help photographers design logos or build websites or create email promotions or print promotions. We've got photo editors who can curate photos or provide creative coaching. We've got publicists who can write bios or write blog posts or write social media content. We've got marketing specialists who can build lists of clients or create marketing plans. And we've got SEO experts who can help photographers with search engine optimization. And of course, we've got producers who can do cost estimates for photographers. And then the third part of our business is that we produce photo shoots for agencies and brands. So we work directly with all sorts of big companies sometimes clients will come to us simply looking for recommendations for photographers, and we'll just put them together. And other times they need help, logistical help putting together a photo shoot. And sometimes those are small, $5,000 or $10,000, and sometimes they're quite large. We just produced a $500,000 shoot in New York a couple months ago. And so they can be really all sizes, and increasingly they involve video as well. And so that's one area that the whole industry, frankly, is growing. Probably about a third of our photographers are pretty adept at shooting video, and
Sure.
we're finding that more and more projects have some sort of video component to them.
And do you find that? I mean, obviously, it's what you're offering is different from a traditional kind of photo agent, because you're not so much repping them in a way where it is exclusive. So photographers who are repped can still kind of use your services, which is quite good.
Yeah,
we have. I guess in a way you are also there potentially as almost like a freelance agent in terms of being able to produce the shoot and act on a photographer's behalf in terms of helping with the costing.
Right. Yes, that's true. We don't really compete with photo agents. A lot of our photographers do have reps, and we don't really do anything that is going to get in the way of the agent relationship. Most of our job is to build awareness for the photographer and bring assignments to the photographer, which in most cases is going to benefit the agent. But you're right. We do provide a la carte services. We can help a photographer with sort of anything. I mean, it's our, one of my objectives is to sort of provide photographers with whatever they need in terms of their business. So, so some of our photographers, I think the current marketplace is that there are a lot more photographers who want agents than can really get agents, and so. So for a lot of our photographers, we effectively serve as their agent. We have some photographers who are on the phone with our photo editors or our producers every week, either talking about sort of the progress of their portfolio, or talking about the next estimate that's coming down the pike. So I like being able to be an advocate for those photographers and help them in their work.
I think the one thing that's so fantastic about that is that ultimately putting together estimates and costings is one area where photographers seem to fall down quite regularly, and people are always kind of unsure about those elements, especially people who are starting out, and can often kind of, such an important part of the job, but it can be something that they just don't enjoy or don't feel comfortable dealing with, which means that they sometimes just don't give it the thought that is needed. So that's where you guys can step in. But also, I mean, the reason I first came to learn about Wonderful Machine was through the estimates that used to be put up on Rob Haggart's A Photo Editor blog. And I remember seeing them and just thinking, this is absolute gold to be able to see how they put these costings together, put these estimates together, what kind of items you should be charging for that you might not have considered. And you were so kind of open and transparent with the information that I felt it was a really helpful resource, because it just allowed you to realize where you should be at or what you could be aiming for. But also there was quite often a lot of blurb that went along with it that would talk through the process, and even explaining that the clients pushed back on this element, therefore, but you were able to get something from this side of things, explaining, understanding budgets and how they work and how some things are in different budgets to other budgets. It's really amazing. So to the listeners, anyone who hasn't seen that, they're all archived, I think, on his blog. So they're a really good place to start, aren't they?
Yeah, so we still contribute to that. Rob still publishes those. If you go to aphotoeditor.com, you'll find 118 of those blog posts, and we've written 117 of them. Mostly by our executive producer Craig Oppenheimer, who's been with us for 11 years, and he just cranks out estimates for all kinds of projects. for photographers every week. And so, one of the things about estimates with photographers is that, photographers are not born knowing how to do a cost estimate. It and it simply takes experience and there's a lot of sort of weird things about the photography business that other businesses don't experience. Like, for example, there's a lot of price elasticity in the photography business, which means that if you're a plumber and if you need a plumber to install a toilet, you could call 5 plumbers and the price is going to be very similar for all
Mm-hmm.
those. But with photographers, you got some photographers who might want to charge $100 a day, and other photographers who might want to charge $10,000 a day.
Mm-hmm.
So that price elasticity sort of makes it an awkward negotiating situation for the photographer and the client. And there's also, combined with that, what you'd call market opacity, which means that nobody knows what anybody else is charging. And that sort of contributes to the confusion for both photographers and clients. If you're a client and you have a project, you can very easily call 5 photographers and get 5 different estimates. And so as a client, you know exactly what the photography is worth, but those 5 different photographers don't know what each other is charging, because there's no, it's not like the price of gold that you can just Google it and know exactly what the price of gold is. Nobody knows. Most photographers don't really know, and so that's why agents can be really valuable, and that's why Craig Oppenheimer and our producers can be really valuable, because they see so many examples of projects. They see editorial projects, they see corporate projects, they see advertising projects, and they get comfortable knowing what different projects are worth in different circumstances for different photographers. And so a lot of it, but I think it's really important for individual photographers to sort of take ownership of that knowledge. Like, I think a lot of photographers are intimidated by pricing, and especially when you add in the whole licensing model, which is like a whole nother facet of this, is that unlike a plumber who's just charging for their time or charging for a particular service, a photographer is partly charging for their time, but they're also partly charging for the licensing value of the picture. And so that just makes it extraordinarily complicated for photographers.
I think that's an area where a lot of younger photographers perhaps fall down as well, is on the licensing. And increasingly we've found and we've seen contracts changing, within the editorial world to get kind of more rights, and clients sometimes not fully understanding licensing either. And I think possibly it's been made more complicated by the kind of growth in moving image and the way that moving image has a slightly different model for licensing, and clients not being able to fully comprehend why it would be different for stills versus moving image. They just kind of want a clear figure for both, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. That's very true. Historically, video, when you direct a video for a TV commercial, the fees are pretty high, and no, there is no licensing per se. The video production company is going to pay the director a fee, and the video production company is going to create the video and hand it over to the client and collect a fee. And the understanding is that the owner is now the client. And historically, still photography has been effectively rights managed, where you're not sort of selling the photo to the client, you are licensing use of the photo for the client, and that's what makes the value scalable. So that if you're doing a cost estimate, that's why it's really important to understand what is the intended use of the photo, and to have the pricing be proportionate to the usage, so that if it's going to be used in one advertisement in a local publication once, that's worth less than if it's going to be used nationally on billboards and national magazines. it's the value is proportionate to the usage, which is sort of hard for photographers to understand in the first place, and it's hard for an inexperienced photographer to articulate that, because some clients might not be familiar with that themselves, because I think there are some photographers who just sort of shoot the assignment and hand it over, and other photographers will write up licensing agreements and negotiate for usage. And so there has never been, I mean, I've been doing this for since the mid 80s. There's never really been a consensus. It's been a fight the whole way for licensing and for charging for usage. I mean, photographers have been complaining about this for decades.
In some ways, that's quite comforting, isn't it, Tom?
In a way, in a way, yeah. At the same time, it's kind of like, how are we kind of 40 years in now and still not got kind of, an easy way to negotiate this, or a kind of a standard set, so clients know they're not kind of constantly trying to drag us down on prices or get more usage or things like that, because it does very much feel like a constant battle. I get a great brief in, and then I'm suddenly like, oh, I really want to shoot this, and then they know that I want to shoot it, and then the negotiations start, and it's got to be my least favorite part of the job in general.
Yeah.
Apart from kind of striking kid and packing away, I think quoting is definitely the least favorite part of it.
I think the other aspect of it is that the industry has changed so much, in the last kind of 30 years, and it continues to change. And there's now new forms of media that weren't around 15, 20 years ago, which also complicate it, because, initially online social use was, quite small. But for now, for certain clients, that's the mainstay of their advertising. So does it make sense that a billboard that gets seen by X amount of people should be at this rate up here, and then it's just for social media, therefore it's down at this rate, and yet actually there's X amount more people who are going to see it because it is on social media and because they've got huge followings. We've discussed this in the past on the podcast, and discussed the prospect of maybe technology also providing the answer for that in the future, and whether or not things like blockchain will have an effect on this, whether or not being able to actually, concretely say this is how many people have been seeing it, this is where it's been used, etc., will actually allow it to be slightly more controlled and managed, and perhaps more of the, benefit the creators a bit more. But it's hard to say.
Yeah, I love that idea. I love the idea that you could be an independent photographer and shoot a news event, or shoot photograph a celebrity, or make any kind of picture and put it on the internet, and have it be basically locked, and then to be able to get paid for use. In the music industry, there are organizations like BMI and ASCAP, who basically are the gatekeepers for songs. And so when radio stations around the world want to play music, or even restaurants, they have to pay a fee. And it'd be great to have some sort of system for photography in the same way. And I guess it's possible that blockchain could be part of that answer.
I assume the reason we don't have anything like that is just the sheer number of photographers, and there's just zero barriers to entry, really, other than the equipment cost. You can go to, your PC World or your Walmart, pick up a camera, and boom, you're a photographer straight away. I mean, how do you kind of manage that?
We in the UK, we do have the Design Artist Copyright Society, DAX, which kind of does something similar to what you were saying with the music industry, in the sense that it gets a set amount of money every year, and it divvies that up to its membership. So if you have images that are being used in the public domain, then you get a share of what's in the pot, so to speak. But it's not widely, you're not going to be making much from it. It's like might be a small editorial fee per year type thing, equivalent. So it's not like you're going to ever be able to survive off of it. But it's the kind of thing is there. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not blockchain can actually kind of enhance those and actually make it more of a global thing rather than something that's just monitored within one country. Because that's obviously the power of the internet, is the fact that this image might not be suitable for this market, but somewhere in South America, suddenly that thing becomes massive and your image gets used everywhere. So
I think
how do you harness that?
Yeah, it's interesting that the internet is simultaneously sort of the culprit of a lot of misuse of photographs, but it also because it's so easy to just replicate, but it also could be the solution, because it's hard to publish something on the internet and not have it be searchable, because you can do a reverse image search to find infringements. And then it becomes a question of, have you registered your copyright? I'm not sure the laws in the UK
it's different here,
or the EU, but in the United States, if you register, in the United States, you really have to register your copyright if you expect to get any kind of leverage in an infringement situation. Even though technically speaking, any photographer owns their copyright at the moment they take a picture. In order to get any kind of restitution, you have to register the copyright, which is frankly an expensive and cumbersome process. And so most photographers don't do it, and so most photographers have very little recourse when they have an infringement.
Right.
Right. I believe at the moment the laws are being looked at here because of there's various. I'm the wrong person to talk about it, so I probably won't say too much more because I'll get it all wrong. But I know that there has been recent kind of changes in the way that digital copyright and stuff is being looked at, and of course with the UK kind of having left the EU, then that's also brought about potential changes to UK law, which makes it even more fun and complicated. For photographers who having very similar issues to musicians, that we're used to being able to travel freely to work, and anyway, don't get me started on that.
One other quick thing about copyright in the United States, they're creating a small claims court for copyright infringement, which I don't know exactly where we are in that process, but that if that goes through, that will greatly streamline the ability for individual photographers to make claims against infringers.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Go on. Sorry, Greg.
I was going to. No, you go.
I was just going to say, obviously, with the advent of the internet, we're talking about what a great thing, blessing and a curse in equal measure. But your route into the industry is now completely different. Would you have gone to college still? If you were going to start again today, would you have gone that route, or would you have spent a couple of months learning everything on YouTube and come out kind of probably maybe more technically proficient because everyone's just giving everything away?
Yeah. No, I think I'm still a fan of college, even though it's very expensive. I've got two daughters who are juniors in college. One who just spent the fall semester at Queen Mary in London.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, college is a mixed blessing. It's super expensive in the United States, at least. But I'm glad I went. But it's true. I think you can, these days, back, if you go back to like probably the 60s and 70s, there you had to be an apprentice to a photographer to become a commercial photographer. So there was a sort of a big barrier to entry. You had to learn a lot about technology that was very mysterious, and you had to create relationships that were hard to make. But now everybody, the internet gives everybody access to YouTube tutorials. And so you really don't need, you can sort of do it on your own if you want to. You're still going to need, clients. You can't, you still have to build relationships. And I think that just in order to be an intelligent human being, you need an education. Like YouTube is no substitute for a university education, I don't think.
No, and also there's all the other experiences that come with it, isn't it? You really kind of learn to find yourself and grow within your social circle and all that kind of, all the social aspects of a university education. So yeah. I'm personally all for it.
Yeah,
maybe not necessarily to study photography. At least not here in the UK, but definitely up for suggesting a university education.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of photographers who didn't study photography. I think it's interesting to see how different photographers have become successful and what their what their sort of origin was. I think there are the types of photographers who start out being sort of geeks for the cameras and the chemistry and all
That
that.
was us.
That was me
us,
too. But then there are other people like I worked for Stephen Meisel, who's a very famous fashion photographer, and he started out as an illustrator, and then just sort of picked up a camera one day, and then the next thing you know, he's shooting for Vogue magazine. And then likewise, I work with a photographer in Los Angeles now named Sam Gabe, and he studied biochemistry in college. So there are a lot of people who I think in some ways there's like an advantage to having sort of real experiences that are not about photography. I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who has done a lot of work for National Geographic, a guy named Rob Clark, who lives in New York, and he was talking about the same thing where photographers will come to Geographic and hope to get an assignment. But what Rob said was, what they're looking for is people with ideas. And so like, it's not enough to know how to use the camera. It's not enough to know how to do retouching. You have to actually have something to say. And I think that's a really important element of being a successful photographer is understanding the world, and having an opinion about things, and being curious, and being interested in subjects that are not photographic, and and thinking about photography as a means to communicate an idea, and not sort of an end in itself. And I think back to the idea of YouTube. I think we have a whole generation of photographers who are in a way talking to each other, and it's a little bit incestuous. And they're sometimes we see these portfolios where you see a whole portfolio of pictures, and many of them are good pictures, but we look at them and we're like who is the client for this portfolio? And so I think one of the things that young photographers need to really think about is to sort of grow beyond sort of making pictures for pictures' sake, and think about if you're trying to earn a living as a photographer, who is your target client, and sort of work backwards in a way from that client to your portfolio. Don't expect to put together a portfolio of your favorite pictures and have clients flock to you.
Sure.
You've got to make pictures and put them together in a way that's going to actually meet the needs of an actual client who has money to spend.
That's good advice. I mean, now that we're on that subject, generally speaking, what kind of, with the benefit of hindsight and your experience in the industry, what advice do you have for young photographers? The industry has changed a lot. There's a lot of new things to consider and to be aware of. Even in the last couple of years, there's been movements that have had direct effects on the photo industry and the way that we perceive what we shoot, what it's okay to shoot, what it's not okay to shoot. It's a constantly evolving area. But generally, given your experience, what kind of things do you think are useful for young emerging photographers to kind of keep in mind?
Yeah. So I knew you were going to ask this question, so I put together a couple things, a couple thoughts. First of all, I think the most important thing for young photographers is to under promise and over deliver. When I started out, one of my first clients was Philadelphia Magazine, just a regional magazine here, and initially they were mostly a black and white magazine, but I would always take color film with me. And back when we were shooting film, it was sort of a big leap going from black and white to color, especially color transparency, because at the time, if you're going to shoot color for a publication, you had to shoot transparencies, and you had to basically nail the color balance, and you had to nail the exposure. And so I was able to. I was sort of fortunate enough to be hired to like shoot an assignment in black and white, but then I would also sort of get to practice shooting it in color, and I would just deliver both to the client.
Hmm.
And if the color pictures were good, they would use the color pictures, and it was a lot. It sort of allowed me to learn while I was on an actual assignment, and sort of simultaneously sort of build a portfolio. And so I think like there are some photographers who feel like, okay, I'm only getting paid X dollars to do this newspaper assignment or this corporate. Sometimes photographers don't get the rate that they want, and they feel like, oh, I can't really justify putting a lot of energy into this assignment. And I think that's a terrible way to look at it. I
Hmm.
think every photographer, regardless how much you're getting paid for any given assignment, or whether you're doing it just on your own, it's every opportunity is a chance to make a portfolio picture. And so I think over delivering is what every photographer should do every time. I mean, you should be shooting for your portfolio with every single assignment.
Hmm.
So I think that's the first thing. And then in terms of like creativity in general, I would say it's really important to start out copying all your favorite photographers, just like musicians often do, but then work towards finding your own voice. I think this is the hardest thing for photographers, is to build a cohesive portfolio that really is unique to them in some way, by
Hmm.
virtue of just your sensibility, the way you see the world, the way you interact with your subjects, the way you handle light or processing or whatever. But to just find your way of putting together a portfolio is really important. And just becoming really technically adept. I think that sort of is where YouTube comes in handy. Just to learn how to do lighting and learn how to do post processing, I think is really important.
Hmm.
And then in terms of branding, like putting together like a presentation for the world, you've got to find a way to like take your photos and present it in a package where a client could look at it and see that you're a professional, or you're professional quality photographer, and that they can trust that if they hire you, you're going to come through. So there's a
Sure.
couple little sort of branding things. Like number one, like settle on a name and use it everywhere. Like so my name is really William, but I've just been Bill
Hmm.
for my whole life. So everything is just Bill Cramer. Like sometimes I see photographers where they'll use Greg and then Gregory, or Tom and Thomas, or different things on their website, on their social media, on their email. I think that with as many photographers there are in the world, it's really important to sort of create an identity for
Hmm.
yourself as a business person, and then just use that consistently so that people can begin to recognize you. And then back to my earlier comment, creating a portfolio that's going to resonate with clients. I think a lot of photographers sort of start out with they sort of start out self-indulgent with their editing, where they're sort of showing pictures that they like, that may or may not be really commercially viable. So,
Hmm.
as artists, we it's sometimes hard to tear ourselves apart from that favorite picture, and this is where working with a photo editor can be really valuable, because the photo editor is dispassionate, and the photo editor will doesn't have the same emotional attachment to the pictures that the photographer does, so that they can sort of look at your pictures dispassionately, and they'll be comfortable leaving out pictures that you might love, and they will also, interestingly, a good photo editor will also see connections in pictures that the photographer themselves won't necessarily see. And
Hmm.
so a good photo editor is going to organize your pictures in a way that makes them much stronger as a group presentation. And so I think the presentation. I mean, I've seen photographer portfolios go from being sort of a mess to being really powerful, just by organizing it. Selecting which pictures to include and in what order and what groupings to include them in. A good photo editor can make a photographer look much stronger uh, than they might on their own. Um, and then just there's nuts and bolts of stuff that you need. Like, you need a functioning website, you need some sort of email promotion, um, back before COVID, photographers had print portfolios. You don't really need that anymore. Photographers used to have printed promos that they would send in the mail. It's hard to send print promos now because everybody's working. Many people are working from home.
Mm-hmm.
But it's nice. I think sooner or later the pandemic will lift and people will be back to meeting more in person. So I think it's nice to have a physical leave behind. When you meet somebody,
Mm-hmm.
um, and and then of course social media is super important now. So especially Instagram. So you just as a photographer have to be sort of cognizant of how you're organizing all those marketing materials and do it in a cohesive and professional way. That when a client sees you, and a client might see you, they might see your email promotion, and then they might see your social media feed, and then they might see your website, or they might see you in a contest. And I just had a call yesterday with a creative agency in Atlanta, and they've heard the creative director said he's been paying attention to us for 10 years, and we have never gotten a reply from him to any of
Mm-hmm.
our emails for the last 10 years. And so last week he decided to reply to our email. And so I think it's really important for photographers to understand like how to build a network, and to just, gradually and respectfully send out, let themselves be known to
Mm-hmm.
clients. And sometimes you're just going to get crickets for years.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, a project is going to come along that matches up with you as a photographer, and that client's going to call. And so you just have to be sort of patient and keep pressing, because I think persistence sort of wins the day
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of situations. Um, should I
No,
take a
that's a
breath
pretty.
there? Should I
Yeah,
keep
I mean,
going?
I
well,
mean, have you got more? Brilliant. No, this is great.
this is gold for our listeners. I mean,
All right.
I guess one thing I wanted to jump in on quickly would be um, if people who are listening are saying, "Oh, actually, yeah, the idea of getting one of the wonderful machine photo editors to help me with some work. How does it work? How is it kind of charged or billed, or how do people go about it? Because that's often a thing that photographers might get put off by, or understanding how production works, for example, because producers can work differently. Some would take just a day rate. Some will take a rate from the whole project.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Does it change? Is it just a
Yeah. So we do for estimates. We usually charge a minimum of $300 for a non-member photographer to do an estimate, and that's usually for about 2 hours worth of time, and then we charge $150 an hour after that. So sometimes an estimate is just sort of do the estimate, and the photographer sends it to the client. Other times, a photographer might ask us to not only do the estimate but also have conversations with the client and negotiate, and so those can sometimes go on longer. Our member photographers get a 20% discount. So for those people, instead of 300, it would be whatever 240. If For all the branding and marketing, we usually charge on the order of $120 an hour, or 20% off for member photographers. So for example, a web edit is something we do a lot of, and we usually charge about $1,200 to $1,500 for a web edit. We and granted that's expensive. We tried to figure out how to, we've got staff members, we have to pay salaries too, so we have to charge enough to get
mm.
quality people to do the work, but we certainly want to make it affordable for photographers. The
Well, I
other
also
thing
think we should let the listeners know. I mean, it's not just you. You've got staff across the world. You've got people in London. You've got people in the Philippines. You've got people all out in Europe, all
Yeah,
over.
so we now have 42 people on our staff. We've got a number of full-time people, and then a lot of part-time people and some freelancers. So yeah, we do now have somebody in Madrid and London and Toronto and Los Angeles and Manila and other places. So as we've become more and more global over time, and especially interestingly with the pandemic, now that we are all working on Zoom anyway, it really doesn't matter where people are. So it has sort
Mm-hmm.
of opened up a lot of possibilities for us. And so I've been gradually adding staff internationally, and that allows us to connect with we've got Elo Garcia in Madrid, who is now connecting with photographers and clients in Spanish, which is really nice to be able to sort of meet people on their own terms. And so yeah, so I aspire to continue growing globally.
So, as it currently stands, is there one rate for photographer members, or is there different stratas or different levels, or is it?
So, so we do have a little bit of we do what we call dynamic pricing, and so the prices sort of vary under different circumstances. But our basic price is about $200 a month for photographers who live in the United States to be part of our directory.
Mm-hmm.
But we do discount it for international photographers, and we discount it pretty dramatically. So if you live in Canada, you pay half price. If you live in the rest of the English, well, the rest of the rich world, like Western Europe and UK and Australia, you pay one quarter of the price. And if you live in a developing nation, you pay 1/8. And the reason we do that is because we want to be able to have a photographer in Rwanda
Mm,
be able to afford to be on Wonderful Machine, because that's good for our clients, because our clients come to us looking for photographers all over the world.
yeah.
And if you're an American photographer in New York or Los Angeles, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to capitalize on the marketing
Mm-hmm.
value of Wonderful Machine. So your membership rate is higher, but you also have a much more of an upside. There's just much more opportunity in the United States than in many parts of the developing world. But we want to be able to provide those photographers for those clients.
But you
Sure.
also, I should note, I guess you have the system in place where you can log in when you're traveling or where you're going to be based, so that stays up to date. And I think that's a really neat feature because
Yeah. So
at the
yeah. So
moment maybe less people are traveling, but I don't know if you remember many years ago there used to be a program called Light Stalkers.
yes.
It was like a photojournalists kind of forum thing, and there you used to be able to update your travel plans so that some picture editor could go, "Oh, Greg's in Kosovo at the moment for the next 2 months. I've got an assignment from Washington Post. I'll get in touch with him." And I
Yeah.
think that's great.
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of perennial problem with for photographers to share where they are. There's also a platform called Blink, who had a feature where photographers could update their present location in real time. But I was, as we were building our new website that just launched in April, this is something I was trying to figure out. What's the solution for this? And what we ended up landing on was that your present location is valuable, but really what's even more valuable is what is your future location. And
Mm,
so we worked with our web developer to create a feature where our photographers can log in to the website, and they can update their travel plans indefinitely into the future. And so if you live in Philadelphia, but next week you're going to be in London, and the week after that you're going to be in Beijing, you can just keep adding your travel plans into the future. And then on the client side, if a client has a particular shoot date in mind, they can search by shoot date, and whatever is their shoot date, the photographers will show up in the search results based
mm.
on where they will be on that shoot date. Um,
Is
so
is there a way of, do you have that differentiated somehow? So, say for example, I'm traveling, I'm in Edinburgh for 2 weeks doing something, but it's a job that can probably be moved. And say for example, a client in the States has searched for me, I would probably fly to that job regardless of where my location was, and I could probably put that on hold.
yeah, so um, yeah, every photographer wants to be considered for every assignment,
Sure.
and so, but my philosophy is you're one human being, and you can only be one place at a time.
Hmm.
So So what we do is in each photographer's bio, it says where they're based. So a client can always look at the bio, and regardless of where the photographer is showing up in the search results,
Hmm.
they can see where they are based in their bio, and they can
Sure.
also search. They can also search for different dates. But the bottom line is that if a client doesn't care about the location, I mean, at the moment, about 2/3 of our searches are location specific, and about 1/3 are just about specialty. And
Right.
so there are clearly some projects where it doesn't matter where the photographer lives because you can get on a plane and be anywhere,
Hmm.
in 24 hours. So I think it just depends on the sensitivities of the client. I mean, what I want to do philosophically is provide meaningful information to our clients. I think that's one of the things that we have always done that I think sets us apart from every other photographer directory, is that we are curate. Every one of our photographers is curated. Like you can't just join,
Hmm.
and even if you do join, we are going to select your specialties for you, and we're gonna make sure that you actually live in the location that you say that you're in, because I think clients value that information. They want to know that they can trust, the information, and we want to provide that level of curation for them.
Well,
But it
I
is a
guess,
dilemma. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it's a dilemma because you can't, the location um, of the photographer at any given moment is it's going to be hard to reconcile any photographer's current location with some assignment that might happen.
of course, of course. I guess also you doing it that way means that it's as reliable for the client, which means that you're not wasting their time, which means they come back, which means you get more jobs. So even if the photographer isn't available for that one because they were kind of happy with how it worked last time, they'll come back, might work for the next guy.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, we're trying. I mean, my philosophy is if we provide a valuable service for the clients, that's going to be good for the photographers. Even though on any given assignment, uh, some photographer might sort of come out ahead or behind. What we want is in the long run to provide a valuable service to photographers, and the only way to do that is to make it valuable for the clients.
Hmm. Sure, sure. That makes sense. With regards to marketing, obviously, some photographers brilliant at it. Some photographers politely, maybe not quite so brilliant. Do you think there's kind of, obviously you guys offer a huge amount of services. You're very much experts when it comes to this. Are there things that you absolutely think photographers should avoid straight away? Because there's obviously, you know pitfalls, advantages to doing things certain ways, and kind of all sorts of well, basically just other things that photographers shouldn't be doing.
hmm So I think they shouldn't be sending out 10,000 emails at a time.
Hmm.
There are some platforms that you can, have access to tens of thousands of emails and just sort of spam everybody. I think that's inevitably. I think what I've seen in the last 15 years is that has made clients. It's just created a lot of static and noise
Hmm.
that makes it that much harder to get through. So I think first of all, sort of figuring out who your target audience is, and curating your list and cultivating your network, and building a list from the ground up instead of starting with 50,000. Just build organically, and really target clients that match up with your interests and your skills.
Hmm.
And I think it's worthwhile to invest in what's called a CRM, a customer relationship management software
Yep.
application. We use a program called Daylight, which is made by Market Circle,
Hmm.
and there's lots of them. But being able to keep track of your prospective customers, and be able to make notes, like if you have a conversation with somebody and you find out their dog's name or their wife's name or their kid's name, make a note of it, and so that you can pick up on that relationship 6 months or 6 years down the line.
Hmm.
Um, but marketing is really just about building awareness for your photography business. It's about sort of budgeting your time, where you're setting aside time each month to gradually work on your portfolio and work on all your marketing materials, and having an actual plan to get that information in front of the right people. So it's
Mm-hmm.
about sort of targeting the right people and making sure that whatever you put in front of them, whether you're sending them an email or you're posting to social media or you're updating your website, you just want to have it be intelligent, and you want to have it be indicative of the brand that you want to build, indicative of the photography that you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to just put it in front of the right people. So it's not
Mm.
rocket science. I don't think there's anything so much to not do. I think it's a matter of just sort of taking some basic simple steps to build a brand and to put it in front of the people that matter.
Mm. I can give you one thing that a photographer absolutely shouldn't do. I once made a mistake of sending in a physical mailer without the right postage on it. That was good. I did, however, I did
And
get a
so, did they have to
reply.
pay for it? Did they have to
They
pay
had they
pay for the
no no
postage?
no not only did they have to pay. Turns out they lived in the middle of the country.
Uh-huh.
They had to do a 5 mile drive to go and collect this thing, and then pay, and then realize it was just one of my mailers, and
Okay.
then send me a very friendly but quite terse email.
But they will never forget you, Tom.
Just for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
Quite. That is a very good point. Well, to be fair, I more than made up for it. I sent them a nice Amazon voucher, which more than covered their inconvenience.
Yeah.
But,
Well, so
but
yeah.
still,
So you turn that around. I'm always interested to hear photographers' novel marketing ideas. Though I had a friend, a neighbor, once drove up to New York. Philadelphia is about a 2 hour drive from New York. So
mhm.
he and his wife drove to New York with a 5 gallon pot of coffee, and a whole bunch of little to go carriers, and they put a photo, a cup of coffee on one side, and a donut on the other side, and a photo mailer in the middle, and dropped off, to a bunch of art buyers, and they had some success with that. So,
Well,
so I think,
you need to get that to the desk while the coffee's still hot, right?
yeah, it's a challenge.
Brilliant.
But I think that the thing about the thing about marketing for photographers is, I think that sometimes photographers get it in their head that they need to do certain things, like they need to do an email blast, or they need to do a postcard, and ultimately, if you're a creative professional. Part of being a creative professional is finding novel ways to get your message to your prospective customer. So,
Hmm.
I think it's really valuable. I mean, we recently had a food photographer. We designed a set of coasters for a food and beverage photographer with his logo on them. Like, I think it's really important to find unusual ways that you can stand out from the crowd, and I think photographers are often sort of feel compelled to sort of go with with the flow, or go
Hmm.
with the conventional wisdom, when in most cases you're probably better off sort of doing things that other people are not doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, Greg. You had a point when I jumped in with that
Well,
one.
I was just thinking that before you came on, Bill, we discussed a number of things that we might want to talk about, and one of them was pricing. And I think it would be a really interesting area for some of our listeners as well. I know we touched on it briefly earlier, but I know you had some really interesting thoughts on it and points, and
Hmm.
so I didn't know whether or not you'd be happy to
Yeah.
go back. I mean, we are running on a bit with this podcast, but I think our listeners would love it
Okay.
anyway. So let's keep going.
All right. So I've got a couple of items left to share. So we started out talking about how no photographer is born knowing how to price photography, and so that means that as a photographer, unless you have an agent who you trust and who's knowledgeable and who can do that for you,
Hmm.
every photographer needs to educate themselves on getting comfortable with the idea of the licensing model. Being able to talk about that with clients without being flustered, or or being intimidated. I think reading, the first thing you can do is sit down and read every one of those 118 pricing and negotiating articles, which will sort of provide you with a really wide range of different types of projects and give you a sense of scale. Ultimately, photographers, there's no sort of right price to charge for a photo. Every project that you quote on is going to be unique, and the price that the photographer and the client agree on it's going to sort of live within sort of the environment of prices that have happened in the recent past. But still, like every time you negotiate a project, it's an opportunity to invent the price for that project, and depending on who that client is and who the photographer is, and what the circumstances of the project are, as a photographer, you need to be able to look at all the unique elements of that project and come up with a price that's appropriate for that. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and so you're looking for basically fair market value. And the way you get to fair market value is just with experience. Over time, you're gonna bid on a lot of jobs, and some you're gonna get, and some you aren't. And every time you get an assignment or don't get an assignment, you're going to have a little bit better idea of what to charge and how to put together the contract. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of clients are going to ask photographers, "What's your day rate?" And a lot of photographers are going to feel compelled to answer that question with a number. I think rule number one is don't give quotes over the phone. You can just say, "Hey, you know what? Let me take a look at your creative brief, and there's a lot of variables here. Let me put something together, and I'll get it right over to you." So you don't ever
Mm-hmm.
have to commit. Like some clients will say, "Can you just give me a ballpark idea
Oh,
of what this is going to cost?"
yep.
And there's no good answer to that question, because your ballpark price is either going to be too high and the client's just going to go elsewhere, or it's going to be too low. And if, like, once you sort of sit down and work through the estimate, if you find out you're higher, it's sort of hard to go back to the client and say, "Oh yeah, I told you it was going to be this, but it's really this." And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's just bad practice to give quotes over the phone. And you want to think about, every photo shoot has sort of a range of value. And there's sort of a minimum and a maximum. The minimum is dictated by the time and effort it's going to take you to do the shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And the maximum is usually dictated by the usage. And so you want to factor in the time, the materials, the expertise, and how and how the client is going to use the pictures. Because just like with any business, there's many businesses make the mistake, and many photographers make the mistake of thinking about the value in terms of the value to them, but really, what really dictates the value is what is the value to the customer.
Mm-hmm.
So a good example is if you go to McDonald's and you can buy a hamburger for $1 and a Coke for $1. It costs the McDonald's 90 cents to make the hamburger, and it costs them 10 cents to make the Coke. But they still charge $1 each. And the reason they do it is because the customer values those things at $1. The customer doesn't really care how much it costs McDonald's to bring them the hamburger or bring them the Coke. And so photographers need to think from a client's perspective, and the client's thinking about the value of that photograph to their project. And the more unique the skills that you have. I mean, one of the things you'll see with advertising photography, the reason advertising photography is so lucrative and expensive is because the photographers who can do that are very rare. A photographer who can take a creative brief and pull together all the production elements and create a dependably and consistently deliver a high quality photograph that addresses a creative brief like that. These photographers are simply rare, and they can command astronomical rates. I mean, we have some photographers who are charging $10,000 to $15,000 a day for multi-day shoots, plus expenses, because they're very talented and they can deliver on a very specific thing. It's not going to be a random thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then also you want to be inventive about the way you price things. So there are going to be some projects that are going to make sense to price by the hour. Some are going to be you might charge by the piece. Like for example, if you're doing still life photography, and a client is sending you a bunch of product, it's probably not going to make sense to charge by the hour unless the client's sitting there with you. And so you want to be savvy about knowing when do you want to charge by the piece and when do you want to charge by the hour. If the client is sort of dictating your time, you're going to want to factor the time into the price a lot. But if the client is just sending you 100 widgets to photograph and they're not there with you, they're not, the value in their head is per picture. And so you can quote it by the picture, which is often going to be more lucrative than quoting it by the hour. And frankly, a client doesn't want to sort of risk having you take a lot of time to do something that shouldn't take a long time. So I think most clients are very happy to have sort of a fixed rate, knowing what the price is going to be up front.
I think breaking your estimates down as well is something that maybe some photographers don't do enough. And if they look at the ones that Wonderful Machine have put on, a photo editor, they'll become aware of that. It's worth having things that you can negotiate that might change, and if they change, that affects the cost, and not painting yourself into a corner where suddenly the brief massively changes, but you haven't got a way of actually reflecting that in the cost, which I see a lot of younger photographers make the mistake because they oversimplify the way that they're putting the estimate together. Yeah. And actually, the more that you have your line items and you can show that this has value, and if you don't need that anymore, quite often I will put things on that they might not have wanted at the time, and I will put the fact that that's a zero cost because it's not being currently used, because it could be 3 meetings down the line they suddenly decide, actually, we do want a makeup artist, or we do want that prop on set, and you can show that when it wasn't an item, it didn't cost, and then when the price goes up, having those things there so that people can actually see what they're paying for, I think is really useful.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. I think it gives I think what you want with any client relationship is to arrive at a win-win. You want to be able to deliver them value in exchange for their money, and by and any certainly any complicated advertising photo shoot is going to have many different elements, and often the production is actually a lot more money than the actual photographic fee. So working with your client to figure out what production elements do you really need, and how much value is there, and where can you cut costs, because every client wants to cut costs, and if you just have a lump sum, it's sort of hard to have a conversation about where to make it more economical. Whereas if you list out the locations and the stylists and the transportation and the COVID compliance and everything, then you can actually, if the client says, okay, we got to cut $10,000, then you can start working with the client on, okay, well, what are your priorities? What can we do without here? Also, that also reminds me of that one of the things that photographers often find that they have to do revisions of estimates. So to your point, Greg, when you might get a creative brief and deliver an estimate, and then a day later the client says, okay, well, this thing has changed. Either the production has changed, or they might say, instead of 5 pictures, we want 10 pictures, or instead of 2 years usage, we want 5 years usage. And so photographers need to think about how to make their estimates scalable. And so your pricing needs to be proportional to what you're delivering, whether that's on the production side or it's on the licensing side. You have to have a sense of sort of benchmarks for what things are worth, and then if the client says, okay, well, instead of that, let's do a little more or a little less, you want to have a sense of, okay, well, how does that impact the price one way or the other? One other thing that sometimes comes up for photographers is whether to ask the client whether there's a budget for the shoot.
I was literally just about to ask you this.
And this is really interesting to me because, like if you were getting your house painted, you wouldn't, if the house painter said, well, how much do you want to spend? That would be a ridiculous question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like it's sort of a commodity, house painting. But with photography, I think it's a totally legitimate, especially for advertising photography. Maybe not so much corporate photography where there's not a lot of production, but with any shoot that requires a lot of production, I think it's a totally valid question to start with. Hey, do you have a budget in mind already?
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're dealing with an ad agency, they, before they ever call the photographer, they already know how much they're planning to spend because they've got art buyers and they've got cost consultants, and they've already gotten their client to sign off on the creative and an approximate budget. And so by asking what the budget is up front, it allows the photographer to tailor the estimate to meet that budget. Not and it's not going to make you sound dumb, like you don't know what your own photography is worth. I think it allows the photographer and the art buyer to go sort of cut to the chase in a way, to
Mm-hmm.
go directly to sort of more final stages of negotiations to sort of fine tune the project. Although I think it is also equally fair for a client, even an ad agency, to say, hey, we don't have any particular budget in mind, can you just work something up? And so for a photographer, anytime you're doing an estimate, there are always going to be unknowns. You want to ask as many questions as possible in advance of doing the estimate, so that you can put together an estimate that's going to be as close to addressing the needs of that project as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever you don't know, you have to make assumptions and you have to put it in the estimate. Like don't leave anything out of the estimate. If you're not sure who's going to provide the talent, you just have to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're going to provide the talent, or the client's going to provide the talent. You have to basically address all of the different needs and assign a price to it, and then let the client come back and say, oh, you know what, we don't have to pay for the location because we're going to use the client's location.
Sure.
But having but if you can get the client to give you a sense of the budget, that's going to get you much closer, much faster.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Excellent. Right.
Is there anything else on that we've not touched on?
Well, just in general, if you're writing it's important to know how to write a licensing agreement. And
Mm-hmm.
there are certain components to a licensing agreement, including how long is the client going to be able to use the pictures, in what territory, what geographic territory is it? If you're in the UK, is it for advertising use in the UK, or is it across Europe as well, or global? And then what type of use? So is it, we divide usage up into three main buckets: publicity, collateral, and advertising. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that we find is that, and especially to your point earlier, Greg, talking about how the internet has sort of expanded usage in so many ways. Gone are the days when you're just going to shoot a picture for an annual report and it's just going to be used for that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Clients want to be able to use pictures for all kinds of purposes into the future. And so what that forces a photographer to do is put together licensing agreements that are pretty broad. And so publicity we define as using a picture to send out in press kits, for news organizations to use. Collateral is when the client is paying for that platform. Like collateral would be for a brochure that the client is paying for their own brochure or for their own website. And then advertising is when you're paying somebody else to place the ad, like on a billboard or in a publication or
Mm-hmm.
on somebody else's website. And so by having these definitions, it allows you to segment. So for example, you might be working for a corporation where they don't expect to use the pictures for advertising. And so you can say, okay, these pictures are for publicity use and collateral use, but not for advertising use. And if you want to use it for advertising use, we can either negotiate that separately down the line, or you can pay up front for the ability to use it in advertising. But
Mm.
it still comes back to the photographer sort of learning and understanding and getting comfortable with just the language of
Mm.
usage. Another important distinction that a lot of photographers confuse is the difference between usage and exclusivity.
Mm.
So when you talk about a licensing agreement, there's two main parts of it. One is how can the client use the pictures, and the other part is how can the photographer use the pictures. And they're two independent things, because you could have a situation where the client could use the pictures, forever, but they might want to use them exclusively for, let's say, a year. And then after that,
Mm.
maybe the photographer can license the pictures, because there are going to be some assignments where you might have pictures that could have residual value for stock, or like in the case of a magazine assignment, if you're photographing a celebrity or the CEO of a company, maybe the magazine gets to use it, exclusively for the first time use, and for a month, and then after that you can license it to other magazines. It's just really important to separate those two things, and to make it clear in your estimate or in your contract how is the client going to be able to use the pictures, and how can the photographer use the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's something that again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with blockchain, it'd be interesting to see in the next 10 years, what changes technology brings to that, and whether or not it actually makes being able to license images easier. Because for a start, you're going to be able to monitor better, when they're being used and where they're being used, but also potentially, someone will come up with a system where you will be able to put in kind of what you want out of an image, and it will give you a kind of rough ballpark figure. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that there have been attempts to do that in the past, but they've not been that successful. Various calculators online to try and help you with costing, which generally, as you said, and for all the reasons that we've discussed, is actually an incredibly tricky thing to do, because the value is not something that you can necessarily create a foolhardy formula for, because it is so dependent on the client and so many other factors, about what you've shot, the product, the person in the shot, whatever, and how relevant that remains.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, but it will be interesting to see whether or not, because I see it a lot where people don't think about the usage, and they end up kind of giving stuff away and not realizing that actually there is a secondary income to be made from licensing your work, and that the value, especially for editorial shoots, is not in the fee that you're going to get for shooting it. It's in having the work in your portfolio, A, so that you get the type of jobs that you want to be getting, but B, so that you can potentially, re-license that work down the line.
Yeah, well, as somebody who for 20 years mostly was doing editorial, I used to, I would have these job folders, and I would have the job number written across the top line, and then every time I sold the picture to somebody else, I would add a letter, so it would be, like 1999 123, and then 1999 123A, and then B, and then C. And there were some pictures that I would sell 10 times over, and often to the publication who hired me, or to the company, and so you're right. Like there were many assignments where I made more money on the residuals than on the original assignment, and so yes, it's important to just sort of understand the value, and to be able to have clear contracts. A lot of photographers come to us with problems, and we say, can you show it? Can you show me your contract? And they're like, well, I don't have a contract. And so it's just very awkward to negotiate after the fact, and it's important to sort of take the bull by the horns, and it takes a lot of courage, but you have to sort of address these contractual issues up front. One other quick thing, if you don't mind, that I forgot to mention. One of the things that we help coach photographers on a lot is transitioning from editorial to commercial, and one of the things that when you're especially if you're a newspaper photographer, you are accustomed to being sort of the fly on the wall. But the minute you transition to advertising photography, you have to be able to lead a team, and in a way, you have to become the life of the party and not the fly on the wall. And it becomes really important to know how to navigate the relationships with the art buyer at the agency and with your producer. The agency might have a producer, and you might have your producer, and you might find yourself on creative calls,
Mm-hmm.
and you might find yourself creating treatments. So in addition to an estimate that you might put together for a corporate client, for an advertising client, you're going to need to put together a treatment as well, which is going to be like a presentation deck, like a PowerPoint presentation or a Google Sheets presentation that shows your capabilities. It shows a portfolio that's specific for that assignment. It indicates that you're interested in doing the assignment and you're capable of doing the assignment. And when you're working for an individual photo editor at a magazine, you're going to have a conversation on the phone, the creative call is going to be like, "Hey, are you available Tuesday?" And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I am. And you go and shoot the assignment. But when you're shooting an advertising assignment based on a creative brief, and the budget could be $100,000 or $500,000, you've got a lot of different people that you have to please, and you have a lot of people that you might find yourself on a call with half a dozen people, and you have to, and even in the decision making process, there might be a series of creative calls with the art buyer and the client, talking with a number of different photographers and having the photographers sort of share their approach to the project. And so in order to be able to compete for those projects, not only do you have to be able to pull off the photos, but you also have to be able to speak to those clients in their own language and be able to demonstrate to them. You have to create a plan for the shoot, and you have to be able to articulate that plan. So I think a lot of photographers struggle with that transition, but we help a lot of photographers understand what they need to do, and we sort of help coach them through that process.
Well, one area on your website that's also really interesting for people to check out is your Intel section, which is kind of like a blog, but more so because it's kind of quite specific articles to do with pricing on jobs or situations that are actually going to be super useful for a lot of photographers. I definitely think that's something to check out. But I also wanted to ask, with everything that we've discussed, where do you see the future of Wonderful Machine? And what have you got kind of lined up in terms of where the company's going and things that are going to be offered? Have you got grand plans or?
So I think we're gonna just incrementally grow. For one thing, we just hired a producer in Los Angeles, and as I say, we've got other junior staff members in other parts of the world. I just want to continue to grow globally because there are so many multinational corporations that need photographers all over the world, and I want to be able to satisfy all of them. So I think our biggest opportunity to grow is doing these photo shoots for these multinational corporations. We just picked up quite a large client in London actually recently, an oil company that's now an energy company, and I just want more of those. We have recently had a bunch of photographers ask us to be their photo agent, like in a conventional way, and so we're trying to figure out whether, is there something that we could do to have a small group of photographers who want more of a sort of intensive relationship, because we've got the 600 photographers that we have a sort of a somewhat superficial relationship with. And I know that we periodically have photographers ask us, "Hey, I would like a commission arrangement, and I would like a deeper relationship." And it sort of is a whole new thing for us, but that's something we're considering.
Mm-hmm.
And then separate from Wonderful Machine altogether, I'm actually building a website called Common History, because I have a personal interest in historic photography, and so I want to create a place for historic photos, not only historic photos that are professionally shot, but also historic vernacular content like family snapshots. And so we're probably 6 or 9 months away from launching that, but we've been sort of chipping away at that over time. And that could also be a platform for photojournalists to, one of the, as a former photojournalist, I like the idea of of being able to enable people to cover stories and post them and get paid for them. And so this could also be a platform that's about not only historic years ago photography, but contemporary photography of important events that we could then license to clients.
Mm.
Interesting.
You sound like a very busy man.
Very busy.
Well, I mean, I think that probably is a good place to bring it to a close. I mean, it's been an absolute, it's been absolutely full of great points of information. So, to the listeners, please do make sure you check out the show notes. We'll try to link to as much stuff as was mentioned as possible.
That's Greg's job, not mine.
And obviously, I was meant to be doing it as I went, but it's just too much. And obviously, we will link to Wonderful Machine, and we shall also try and link to the section of A Photo Editor where these 118 estimates are, because that's definitely some homework for the listeners. Is there any other resources online that you think our listeners would be interested in, they should check out? Do you guys have a presence elsewhere? Are you an avid Twitterer? Are you a Instagrammer? Are you serving out photo tips on TikTok?
It just blinked. I must confess, I'm not really on social media very much myself. We do have a social media manager who handles that. I think a photo editor is the best blog for photographers who are genuinely commercial and editorial photographers. I think the photography space is really full of a lot of technical blogs, which are interesting, but if you want to be a commercial or editorial photographer, I think a photo editor is the best place to spend your time.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So it's at this time in the show where we kind of finish up and we do our Desert Island photo book and camera. So if you are stranded, bear in mind there over the first season, we realised that there is in fact power on this island and a film processing lab. So you can basically take whatever you want. But what would be your Desert Island camera, do you think?
Okay, so again, back to 5th grade in Mrs. Alexo's class. One of the cameras that she used to loan out was an Olympus Pen half frame camera. Mm-hmm. Have you guys ever heard of a half frame camera?
Yeah, but I've never seen one.
Okay.
I think I have one probably up there. Is it a Pen 35? Did they do half frames?
Probably. The pen, they named it the pen because it was small. And of course you got 72, on a roll of 36, you would get 72 pictures. Or almost 72, because I think there's a little bit more margin, but you got twice as many pictures, even though they were half as small. So that would be my camera of choice.
Brilliant.
And then your Desert Island photo book, what's that?
So do you guys know Jacques Henry Lartigue? So
very very early photographer. Came from quite a rich French family, didn't he? Like an aristocracy.
Yeah, so he came of age.
That very famous picture of the moving car.
Yeah, well, because the way the shutters, he had a camera with an old fashioned camera, of course, in like 1906 with a focal plane shutter, and so as he panned to photograph the car, and as the shutter moved across the film plane, it effectively distorted the wheel, so the wheel looked like it was oblong, and
Yeah, I mean, he basically suffered from the original rolling shutter problem, which still plagues photographers 100 years later.
But there's a book. There's a bunch of different books with Lartigue, but there's one published in 1998 that's simply called Jacques Henry Lartigue, Photographer, and it's just the most incredible photo book. It's really thick, so you can be on your desert island for a long time. And it also has a bunch of gatefold pictures where not only is the book itself pretty big, it's like 13 or 14 inches square. So it opens up pretty big, but then it's got several different pictures that open up as gatefolds.
Oh wow! Okay.
So for those desert island, long night.
Once you've built your boat, you could rig it up as a sail potentially to get out of there. There have been a few people that have genuinely picked cameras and books in order to escape the island, which wasn't the initial concept behind it.
It doesn't sound so bad being stuck on a desert island.
Hey, it's got all the mod cons, so it doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a great book. We will try and find that edition, the 1998 edition, and put a link up to it. And yeah, I mean, thank you so much for coming on today, Bill. You've been an amazing just oracle of information.
A wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate your time.
Very much appreciate your time. So thank you once again for coming on.
Sure thing.
Thank you very much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to find out more or to see the show notes, please go over to exposenegative.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at xnegative. It's very imaginative. And if you want to email us, you can email us at info@exposenegative.com.